Hey Geordie, we're in Salem. Where are we off to?
And there's some witches out north that way. We're gonna go hunting
I'll
them.
get the cannon. It's a big cannon. Got a big cannon here at the front. Do you see any witches?
Can't say I do. Not be a cloud in the sky. That makes it pretty difficult to find them.
There's the moon. I reckon the witches put it there. Damn witches. With the moon.
Bloody devil's work, I say.
Take us to port, Geordie. Oh, that's starboard. That doesn't matter. That'll be port. We're off. Too much port, and Geordie's off to starboard.
Hi everyone, bewitched! There you go. Hi Burra Country Crew, we're in Salem and this is the main cemetery from back in the 1600s, and this is where there's, well, quite a few people buried, and a lot of the original tombstones are still here. So it's quite interesting, and just beside it, as I'll have filmed around, is also the Witch Memorial for those people that were hung or crushed or whatever. None of them were burned at a stake for being charged as being witches. So these are the memorial stones that have been erected here in modern times to memorialise those people that were killed during the famous Salem Witch Trials. And I guess the main thing that is really surprising if you don't know the history of this is this wasn't really about these people being witches. They used the idea of a witch hunt, they used the idea of creating fervour in a town and that sort of thing to stir up fear and stir up anxiety amongst people. But this was pretty much all orchestrated by a girl, a young girl, who actually just didn't like people, some people. Her father was a judge or a governor in the town, and basically they trumped up charges and they created fear that this must be a person. Now, it did start from someone having a seizure, or a number of people girls having seizures, which was actually to do with a virus or some sort of infection. No one's really quite sure what, but it did start off with something real, but it was taken advantage of, and they created what we in modern times would refer to quite fairly as a witch hunt. They put trumped up charges for these people and basically killed them, and they did this within a very short period of time. When I say that, it was 20 people within about 6 weeks they'd executed in this town. Now, the 20 people in a town that size in those days would have been considerable, and it just goes to show that how if you can make people frightened, they'll do virtually anything. Now, later on, this girl actually admitted to this and to making this up, and of course it's all too late for these people. So this memorial is not about people who wanted to create magic. They're not about, even though Salem is famed and now they do all this witch tourism, they do all this witch stuff, which is really probably quite inappropriate in many respects. This was about what happens when you frighten people and you get people fearful, and you convince a group of people to act like sheep, basically. And they killed their neighbours, they killed their friends, and this is a perfect example of this. It was not about religion, it was not about anything like that. It was completely to do with, who knows, it was taking advantage of fear in order to gain some sort of personal notoriety or something. But at the end of the day, it really wasn't about witches. Okay, so here we are. We're actually in the cemetery now, and none of those people that were executed as witches are actually buried in here. Now, surprisingly, this has nothing to do with religion. I actually asked someone here who is a one of the people that help preserve this area and provide some tourist information, and this is not consecrated ground. It's not like that. So when the pilgrims came over from England, they separated themselves from the church and state the way that they wanted to. That was part of the idea of the freedom for religion and for everything else. And cemeteries were not owned by the church. They weren't built with a church beside them. Here, these were not consecrated religious grounds like you might see in a movie. Basically, anyone could be buried here. There was none of that sort of thing. The only thing that they didn't bury, or the only people they didn't bury, were witches in here, because they just didn't want them near them, and they were also still frightened of them, even though they were dead, which was kind of part of the whole angst of the idea of witches back in those days. Now, as we walked in there, you saw there was all these, it looked like bodies wrapped in plastic as we walked in. Now, this is only a week or so after Halloween, and this town is just packed to the rafters during Halloween. People come here and they celebrate Halloween because it's this witch place. But yeah, there are all these bodies wrapped in plastic sitting there around the cemetery. Something that I'm not so interested in, but certainly walking around this cemetery, it is fascinating to see these. A lot of these are the original tombstones where the tombstone has broken. They have come up with ways to preserve those, which is just brilliant. And some of these are extremely old. These are some of there are people here from the famous Mayflower that are buried here. Back from way 1600 or so, and people live surprisingly long lives. We often think that the average lifespan was very, very short. It might have been on an average, but there's a lot of people in here that died in their 80s and way back 400 years ago. So pretty impressive. So maybe there is something about working hard and eating vegetables. People still lived a long time. So yeah, so this is a great place to walk around. Look, please, if you come here, this is a must. It is one of those things, and there are people who don't like walking around cemeteries and that sort of thing, but the history here is amazing. And the styling on this, you'll see in the tombstone in front of us right now, you can see it looks like a skull on there. And this was a standard piece of art form for depicting that this is a grave. It wasn't intended to scare, as far as we know. It's just part of the art form, and these gravestones were artistic in their way and in their day. And in fact, we talk about recycling. Some of these tombstones, I know that another cemetery in Boston, they've identified a number of them. I'm not so sure here, but it probably happened, and that is that these tombstones were often recycled. So if the wording had worn off and you couldn't see it anymore, and maybe it was 50 years later or 100 years later, they would flip the tombstone over, turn it around the other way, and engrave on the opposite side. So there are actually tombstones that have names on both sides, and one's upside down. It's upside down because they flipped the tombstone over when they recycled it. So there you go. Quite a bit of recycling done, even in cemeteries. We're in the Real Pirates Museum of Salem, and there's a little young fella there. He was the youngest crew member. Well, not him, but he's a statue of the youngest crew member of the Widder I assume is the name of the ship. And this is actually all real recovered stuff from a pirate ship, of a real pirate ship, which is why it's called the Real Pirate. So, this place. So after visiting the Real Pirates of Salem and having quite a chat with the fella in the gift shop who was doing his best Jack Sparrow and dressed the part, so really into the part of it, so well done. And great, quite a realistic guy to talk to, who actually told me he'd worked in quite a number of the stores around Salem over the years, and was a little bit was happy to be working in an area that was actually talking about something that was actually real. So there you go. So anyway, we moved out and we walked up to what is the main area that tourists visit in Salem, and this is the main street. Now, a week and a half ago, this street would have been absolutely jammed, packed with people. You can see there's still decorations up and things tied up there from Halloween. But lots of stores along here. Now, a lot of them are selling strange witch potions, witch things, and some of them are museum stores. There's one up here that's really quite famous, and it has quite a lot of great T-shirts and horror movie museum information in there, and those things are kind of interesting. There's also a great big museum here. This is a real museum that looks at the history of Salem and also looks at all the history, including how the witch trials went and how the shipping industry and how the pilgrims came over here and made a city here in Salem. So really quite an interesting place to walk around, and quite a comfortable place to walk around as well. So here we are, we're just walking up to the Salem Witch Museum. Now this museum is touted as being historically accurate or close to accurate as possible, and it is. The story that it tells you when you first go in, it's in two sections. The first section gives you the history of the witch trial, that famous witch trial with those people that we saw in the cemetery memorial there, how that came about, and it does tell the full story there, and so that was actually pretty good. You know, there's other witch museums here that aren't really about history, they're just witch stuff. The second part of it, not so interesting. It was about the history and about how people get wound up with fervour and all that sort of thing, but also it took an odd tangent. But look, certainly it's worth having a look at. But very touristy, very, very touristy, all this stuff. So this is a walk over to the park. We came over, we're heading across now to the House of Seven Gables, and it's within walking distance, and so we're walking across the parkway, because why not? A parkway is a good place to walk, and we'll be heading down there, and also to the oldest lolly shop or sweet store in all of the US. This is the house that's known as the House of Seven Gables, and it was the house that Nathaniel Hawthorne lived in, and when he wrote the House of Seven Gables, and basically it was modelled, that book was modelled on this house and living within this home, and used as the backdrop for that book. So it's become quite famous. It's a historical site now, and the gardens are very well maintained, the buildings are well maintained, and it's a very popular place for people to come to. And why wouldn't you? It is really built in one of the most beautiful places you'd ever come across, sitting on the water's edge, and it's just got magnificent views out the back of it. And I'm sure that from some of those rooms, the views across this town would be very spectacular. So wonderful gardens, being well kept, and a great place to come, and as Geordie's doing there, having a seat and just looking around. It's a lawsuit, Geordie, it's a lawsuit.
Yeah.
Or some sort of suit.
I mean, it probably would have been if I actually knocked my head on there. Probably would have.
Geordie's found a happy place to sit. So after the Seven Gables, we crossed the street, and straight across the street from that house is the oldest candy shop in all of the US. It's over 200 years old. It was started by a woman who came out to the country from the UK, and nice history. She lost all her property on the way over, and someone helped her out with a small token of some assistance. She was a smart business lady, turned into quite a roaring trade, built up a new business, and then that got sold on later to another organisation or to another company, and they've carried that on ever since. Great store, makes a killing out of the tourists. Great. They still sell lollies that were a lolly that was originally made back 200 years ago, which are basically a hard peppermint, and you can buy those, and I'm sure they make good money out of those. We bought some, like all the tourists do. Yeah, they're all right, but it's just a lolly shop, but you know, it's quite a tourist thing, and they do make some very nice lollies and chocolates and things in here. So I would still say it's still worth having a bit of a pop in and a visit and have a look around. As you can see, this is still filled with Halloween decorations. So we've now started our walk back to town, and we're heading off to the train station to take us back into Boston. One of the things about walking around a place like this with a vision impaired person, you're constantly trying to point out that there's hazards and things, and I'm sure that Geordie gets sick of me telling him there's a step, I don't know, but in this case there was a lot of loose stones in these streets and a lot of misplaced stones, so a bit of a walking hazard if you're vision impaired down this particular road. Big steps here as well, and there. Oh, it's the first time I didn't say, Geordie, there's a step, and I thought, and they blended right in, those bricks. Sorry, Geordie. I wasn't at home for aged women. There you go, Joyce, found your house. Home for aged women. It's a house for Joyce.
A small place.
Yep.
What's this?
Unlike you, established 1861. Well, that brings our walk around Salem to an end, and thanks for joining us again on another Burra Country adventure. And we have one more in this series of videos where we will be walking the Freedom Trail in Boston. So this was well worth coming to have a look at. There's a lot of history here, there's a lot of strangeness goes on here, which, you know, kind of suits what the town is famous for. It is very touristy in the middle of town, and I'm sure there's some great places to go and visit around the town as well. We're walking everywhere, so we don't have a car, so there are some things we may have missed out on, but all in all, it was great to come for a walk here, and I would certainly recommend it if you're into the history, and also if you're into a bit of some of the fantasy stuff. Well worth coming and having a look here in Salem in Massachusetts. See you next time.